Deep, slow dramatic music fades in. Let me tell you about the moment my entire life changed. It was a Tuesday afternoon in February. I came home early. My wife's car was in the driveway. My best friend's car was parked on the street outside. I walked through the front door. I called my wife's name. Silence. So I went to the kitchen and made coffee. And from upstairs I heard her laugh. Not her polite laugh. Not the one she used at dinner parties. Her real laugh. Her private laugh. The one I had spent 6 years believing was only ever meant for me. Coming from our bedroom. Most people in that moment would have run upstairs. Screamed. Thrown something. Fallen apart completely right there in the hallway. I poured my coffee. I sat down at the kitchen table. And I started thinking. What I did over the next 22 days destroyed two people's carefully constructed lives without a single lie, without a single illegal act, without me ever once raising my voice. This is that story. Every detail. From the very beginning. And I promise you by the time we reach the end you will understand why the most dangerous person in any room is the one who chooses to. To understand what happened, you first need to understand what I had. Because the depth of a betrayal only makes sense when you understand the depth of what was betrayed. I was 34 years old. Project manager at a mid-sized tech company. I was good at my job, not the loudest person in the room, not the most ambitious but reliable, methodical, the kind of person teams called when something was broken and needed fixing. I had a house in a quiet neighborhood. 2 bedrooms, a decent backyard, the kind of street where neighbors still wave at each other in the morning. I had a dog named Chester, a golden retriever mix who operated on the absolute certainty that every human being on earth existed specifically to scratch behind his ears. Chester has never had a complicated relationship in his life. I envied him for that later. And I had Sarah. Sarah and I met at a work conference 7 years before any of this. She was presenting on customer retention strategies. I was sitting in the back row pretending to take notes while actually sketching the floor plan of my dream house on a legal pad, something I did when I was bored, which I have never admitted to anyone until this moment. She caught me mid-sketch. After the session she walked over, looked at my drawing, and said without any preamble whatsoever, "You put the bathroom in a terrible place." I was in love with her before she finished that sentence. We had dinner that night. Breakfast the next morning. 6 months later she moved into my apartment. 2 years after that I proposed on a hiking trail in the rain because I had planned an elaborate rooftop dinner and a whole speech, and then it started pouring and I panicked and just did it right there on the muddy trail, wet hair, no speech, completely unplanned. She said yes before I finished asking the question. We married on a Saturday in October. 70 guests. A cake that cost more than it should have. A DJ who accidentally played the same song on repeat for 6 full minutes and everyone pretended not to notice until the third chorus when my aunt finally said something. I loved Sarah. I want to say that clearly and without any performance because I think it is important to the story. I loved her in the quiet, daily, completely unglamorous way that real love actually functions, the way where you know someone's coffee order and their irrational fears and which 3 topics will make them talk for 40 minutes without stopping. I loved her without reservation. Without condition. Without the thought that I should be watching more carefully. That last part mattered. And then there was Marcus. Marcus had been my best friend since the first week of college 14 years before any of this happened. We were randomly assigned to the same dorm room freshman year. The university had double booked it by mistake. There was one bed. We both showed up with boxes and stood in the doorway staring at each other. After about 10 seconds, Marcus said, "Rock paper scissors for the bed, or do we just go buy a second one?" We bought a second bed. We became best friends. That is the entire origin story. 14 years. 14 years of Marcus being the first phone call when anything happened. Good news, bad news, didn't matter. He was the best man at my wedding. He gave a speech that made my grandmother cry and my old college friends cheer at the same time, which is genuinely difficult to pull off. He was there the night my father had his first cardiac scare, sitting with me in a hospital waiting room at 2 in the morning saying nothing useful but being completely present. He had a key to my house. He came over for dinner without calling ahead because he didn't need to. Chester loved him almost as much as he loved me, possibly equally. Chester has no loyalty. People in our friend group called the three of us the trio. Other couples said they were jealous of how naturally we all fit together. Sarah used to joke that Marcus was the brother-in-law she actually liked. I loved that joke once. Now I know the affair had been going on for approximately 4 months before I found out. 4 months of dinners and weekend barbecues and Sunday mornings where I made pancakes for all three of us, and Marcus sat at my kitchen table and poured syrup on his plate and looked me directly in the eye and talked about baseball and work stress and whether Chester needed obedience training. 4 months. 119 days. I want you to hold that number in your mind. Because it comes back. February. A Tuesday. My afternoon meetings were cancelled, a last-minute system migration that bumped the entire calendar. I texted Sarah to say I was coming home early, but she didn't see the message in time. When I pulled into the driveway at 2:47 in the afternoon, her car was there, Marcus's car was parked on the street, and the house had that particular quality of silence that a home gets when the people inside it believe they are completely alone. I noticed the silence the way you notice something before you have words for it yet. I unlocked the front door. Called Sarah's name. Nothing. I assumed they were in the backyard. That happens sometimes, they'd sit outside when the weather was decent. I went to the kitchen. Started the coffee maker. Familiar sounds, familiar smells, the ordinary machinery of a life I believed was intact. And then from upstairs her laugh. Her real laugh. Unguarded. Private. The laugh she only made when she felt completely safe. Coming from our bedroom. I stood completely still. Something shifted inside me in that moment. Not like a lightning bolt, not like something dramatic from a film. More like a quiet, terrible click, the sound of something locking into place that you didn't know was unlocked. A door closing somewhere inside you that you didn't know was open. I walked to the bottom of the stairs. I went up. I stood in the doorway. I am not going to describe what I saw. You already understand what I saw. What I will tell you is that I stood there long enough for every possible doubt to be completely, permanently gone. And then I turned around. Walked back down the stairs. Poured my coffee. Sat at the kitchen table. And I thought. Not about what to scream. Not about what to throw. I thought about the fact that I am, at my foundation, a project manager. I identify problems. I assess variables. I build plans and I execute them and I measure outcomes. It is not glamorous, but it is who I am. I had just been handed the largest, most personal problem of my life. About 20 minutes later I heard movement upstairs. I quietly picked up my coffee, walked out the front door, got into my car, and drove away. I sent Sarah a text, meetings ran long, grabbing dinner with a coworker, don't wait up. She replied 4 minutes later with a heart emoji. I pulled into a parking lot 3 miles from my house and sat in my car until the sky went dark. And I made a list. Not emotional. Strategic. The kind of list I would make at work when a project had gone catastrophically wrong and I needed to understand the full situation before deciding on a single action. Here is what I wrote. Number 1, I do not have complete information yet. I know what I saw this afternoon. I do not know how long this has been happening, how often, or how deep it goes. Number 2, I have joint financial assets with Sarah. A mortgage. Shared bank accounts. A shared car insurance policy. If I walk back into that house tonight and blow everything up in anger, I lose control of the financial situation before I understand it. Number 3, Marcus is currently being considered for a promotion at his company. Senior Operations Director, he had talked about it constantly for 3 months. The position required what his company called a character and integrity review by their HR department. I had filed that information away somewhere in the back of my mind without knowing why I was keeping it. Now I knew why. Number 4, Sarah's mother, Linda, has called me her son out loud at family dinners. She has no idea her daughter is capable of this. She will need to hear the truth, and she needs to hear it from me before Sarah can shape the narrative. Number 5, we share a mutual friend group of 12 to 15 people who are currently living inside a version of reality that is not real. I looked at that list for a long time in that dark parking lot. And then I wrote one more line at the very bottom. It said, do not let anger make the decisions. Let it fuel the preparation. For the next 22 days, I did not say a single word. I came home every evening. I had dinner. I watched television. I walked Chester. I went to bed next to my wife and I slept or I did not sleep, but I lay there and I said nothing. I performed my life like a stage actor who has read the entire script while everyone else around him believes they are in an improvisation. Every scene played normally. Every morning, every evening, every passing interaction executed without a crack. It was the hardest thing I have ever done. During those 22 days I was doing 3 things simultaneously. The first thing was getting a lawyer. I found 3 divorce attorneys and interviewed all 3 on my lunch breaks over the course of a week. The third one, a woman named Patricia, was sharp, efficient, and completely unsentimental about human suffering in a way I found deeply reassuring under the circumstances. When I explained my situation, she did not express sympathy or outrage. She asked me 6 precise questions about our assets, our mortgage, our income documentation, and our account structures. Then she told me what I was legally entitled to, what steps I needed to take immediately to protect my financial position, and what documentation would matter most when we filed. She also said something I wrote down the moment I got back to my car: the spouse who walks in with documentation always does better than the spouse who walks in with emotion. I decided then and there that I was going to be the most documented spouse Patricia had ever represented. The second thing I was doing was finding the evidence. We had a shared family iPad that lived on our kitchen counter. We used it for recipes, for streaming shows while cooking, for settling arguments at the dinner table about random facts. It was just part of the furniture of our life together. What I discovered, when I looked carefully at it one afternoon while Sarah was out, was that Marcus had been communicating with Sarah through a messaging app that was synced apparently without his realizing it to that iPad. Maybe he forgot. Maybe he never thought about it. Maybe he simply never worried, because why would he worry? I was the safe, oblivious, trusting nice guy. He had no reason to be careful around me. He was not careful. I found messages going back almost exactly 4 months. Long conversations. Detailed conversations. Conversations containing specific language that made it completely impossible for either of them to later claim this had been a single impulsive mistake or a brief lapse in judgment. This was a choice. A deliberate, repeated, daily choice across 119 days. I screenshot every relevant message. Airdropped them to my personal phone. Uploaded them to a private cloud account that Sarah had no access to and no knowledge of. Then I placed the iPad back in its exact spot on the counter, made sure it was plugged in and the screen was dark, and went to make tea. Patricia reviewed the screenshots at our next meeting and told me they were, and I quote, more than sufficient. The third thing I was doing was moving money. Legally. Carefully. With Patricia reviewing every single step before I took it. I did not steal from our joint account. I did not hide assets illegally. What I did was ensure that going forward, the money I personally earned went into a personal account rather than our shared one. Every transaction was documented, disclosed appropriately, and completely above board. I was not trying to cheat Sarah. I was trying to make sure I was not left financially exposed when I finally made my move. At the end of those 22 days I had three things: a lawyer who knew everything, documentation of everything, and financial protection. I was ready to begin. I had 3 moves planned. In my head I called them my deliverables, old habits, and I was going to execute them in sequence, calmly and completely, with no explosions and no drama. Deliverable 1, the divorce. Deliverable 2, Marcus's promotion. Deliverable 3, the truth. On a Saturday morning, 3 weeks and 1 day after the Tuesday, I came downstairs while Sarah was sitting at the kitchen table with her morning coffee, and I placed a manila envelope on the table in front of her without saying a word. She looked at the envelope. Then she looked at me. And something shifted on her face, not quite guilt, more like a particular awareness, the look of someone who has been unconsciously bracing for something they convinced themselves was never coming. I said, I know everything. I have documentation going back 4 months. My attorney's name is Patricia and she'll be handling all communication on my side going forward. I'd strongly suggest getting your own representation. She was crying before I finished the sentence. She tried to explain. She said it was complicated. She said it had been a mistake. She started to say that it had only happened a few times, and I watched her face carefully when she said that, because it told me something important. It told me that she believed I only knew about a small portion of what had actually occurred. She thought I had caught the edge of something. She had no idea I was holding 119 days of their own words in a cloud account. I said, a few times. You mean the 119 days documented in your own messages? The color left her face. I said, Patricia will be in touch. I picked up my coffee. I walked to the front door. I got in my car and I drove to my cousin Danny's house, where I had already packed a bag the night before, because I had planned this moment the same way I planned everything else. The divorce took 8 months. Because I had prepared thoroughly and moved carefully, the settlement was fair. I kept the house I bought out Sarah's share at the assessed value, which Patricia helped me structure correctly. We divided the joint accounts. It was not painless, I want to be honest about that. Nothing about this process was without pain, but it was clean. It was orderly. I walked out of it with my finances intact, my house intact, and the specific quiet satisfaction of knowing I had not once lost control. Patricia told me at the end that I had been her most methodically prepared client in 22 years of family law practice. I considered that a professional accomplishment. Now. Deliverable 2. Marcus. I need to be precise here because this is the part that people respond to most intensely, and I want you to understand exactly what I did and did not do. I did not lie. I did not fabricate anything. I did not impersonate anyone. I did not do anything illegal or defamatory. What I did was write an email. An anonymous email to the HR department of Marcus's company. The email explained accurately, using specific details drawn directly from his own text messages, that their candidate for senior operations director had spent 4 months in deliberate, sustained deception of a close friend while conducting a prolonged affair. The email noted that this behavior occurred entirely during the period in which Marcus had been actively and loudly campaigning within his organization for a leadership position that, by their own publicly stated criteria, required candidates to demonstrate integrity, trustworthiness, and strong personal character. I attached no names. No photos of anyone. No identifying information about Sarah or about me. I simply made sure that the people whose job it was to evaluate Marcus's character had accurate information about Marcus's character. That was all. I sent the email on a Monday morning from a temporary anonymous account, and then I deleted the account. 3 weeks later, a mutual friend mentioned casually in conversation that Marcus had not gotten the promotion. Apparently the decision had come down very suddenly and without much explanation. Marcus was, by all accounts, furious. He had no idea why it had happened. He spent weeks trying to figure out what had gone wrong in the review process. He never found out it was me. He still doesn't know. And I want to address something directly here, because whenever I have told this story, and I have told it more times than I expected, someone always asks, wasn't that going too far? Wasn't that vindictive? My answer is always the same. Marcus sat at my dinner table for 4 months. He held my dog. He ate food I cooked. He looked directly into my eyes during conversations and made deliberate choices, every single day, to continue deceiving me. Every laugh, every normal conversation, every ordinary Tuesday evening at my house, a choice. Repeated 119 times. I gave his employer accurate information. They conducted their own review and made their own independent decision. I invented nothing. I destroyed nothing. I simply told the truth to people who needed it to do their jobs correctly. That is all I did. Now deliverable 3. The truth. This one was the most personal of the 3, and in some ways the one that mattered most to me, not as strategy but as something I genuinely needed to do. I called Linda, Sarah's mother, before Sarah had a chance to call her first. I kept it simple, factual, and as kind as I could manage under the circumstances. I told her what had happened. I told her I had documentation and that there was no ambiguity about what had occurred. I told her I was not calling to damage her relationship with her daughter that was between them. I was calling because Linda had called me her son at family dinners for 6 years, and I believed she deserved to hear the truth from me rather than a version of it shaped by someone with a reason to minimize things. Linda was quiet for almost a full minute after I stopped talking. And then she said, "I am so ashamed of my daughter." Not, "I'm sure there's another side." Not, "Marriages are complicated, these things happen." Just, "I am so ashamed of my daughter." She asked if she could call me the following week to check how I was doing. She did. And the week after that. And the week after that one. Linda and I still have lunch together every couple of months. She sends birthday cards. She asks about Chester and about work. She asks about Diana now too, but I'll get to Diana in a moment. Some connections, it turns out, are stronger than the relationships they grew out of. Some loyalties survive even the most thorough destruction of everything around them. After all 3 deliverables were complete, after the papers were filed, after the email was sent, after Linda and I had our first long phone call, I did one final thing. I posted to Reddit. I posted to our Surviving Infidelity. A long post. The whole story laid out in full, no names, no identifying details, just the truth of what happened and what I had done about it. I posted it late on a Thursday night without expecting very much. By Friday morning it had 14,000 upvotes. By Saturday evening it was at 47,000. The comments were thousands deep and kept coming. People who had been through something similar. People who were currently in the middle of something similar and needed to see that there was a path through it. People who had never experienced anything like it but who recognized something human in the story, the choice between rage and patience, between destroying something and building something better. I sat and read comments for most of that Saturday. I did not reply to a single one. I just read. And then something happened that none of us, not me, not the Reddit community, not anyone, had anticipated. Marcus found the post. I genuinely do not know how. Perhaps a mutual friend sent it to him. Perhaps he was in one of his post-rejection spirals, searching the internet for something he couldn't name, and the algorithm delivered it to him. I don't know. What I know is that he found it. And he made a catastrophic mistake. He commented on it. He did not admit to anything. He was not confessing. But he wrote a comment, careful, vague, defensive, that disputed certain characterizations of the story and suggested things were more complicated than presented. The Reddit community noticed within minutes. Because here is the thing, if you are a stranger reading a post about someone else's infidelity story, a story with no names, no identifying details, nothing traceable, there is no reason on earth to comment defending one of the parties. There is simply no reason to do that unless you recognize yourself in the story and you are frightened. The comment section understood this immediately. Replies started flooding in, pointing it out. People were screenshotting the comment. Others were tagging it, sharing it, pulling it into other threads. Within an hour the comment itself had become a separate story, the one where the cheater finds the post and accidentally exposes himself by trying to defend himself in the comments. That story traveled across multiple subreddits. It was shared on Twitter. It found its way into a Discord server our mutual friends used, which is how Sarah's phone started ringing with messages from people in our friend group who recognized the story. Marcus deleted his comment 2 hours after posting it. He deleted his entire Reddit account 4 hours after that. I didn't make a single phone call. I didn't send a single message. I didn't respond to one comment in that entire thread. Not one word. I simply let the truth exist in the world. And the truth, when you give it room and oxygen and time, travels remarkably well entirely on its own. Now I want to tell you about the part that comes after. The part that real revenge stories rarely include because it isn't dramatic, it isn't satisfying in any clean narrative sense, and it doesn't fit neatly into a 3-act structure. It's just life. The daily, difficult, slowly improving work of rebuilding. The divorce finalized 8 months after I handed Sarah that envelope. I kept the house. We divided everything else. I moved back into the house alone, just me and Chester, and I stood in the kitchen the first morning and made coffee and looked at the room that I had once shared with someone and understood that I was now in the part of the story where no plan helps you. You just have to live through it. Sarah and Marcus began dating officially about 2 months after our separation. I heard about it from a mutual friend who told me gingerly, as though the information might physically injure me. It didn't injure me. I want to be honest, it did hurt, in the specific dull persistent way that confirmation of something you already knew still manages to hurt. There was a week shortly after that where I was genuinely not okay. I stayed in more than I should have. I did not sleep well. I was not at my best. But there is something I learned in that week that I have carried with me since: you can feel the pain without becoming the pain. You can sit with something hard, stay in the same room with it, and not let it make your decisions. You don't have to run from it and you don't have to be destroyed by it. You can just wait. And move. And eventually wake up one morning and find that the first thing you thought about was not them. That morning comes. It takes longer than you want it to. But it comes. I threw myself into work. Received a promotion, senior project manager, which came with a salary increase I genuinely needed once I bought out Sarah's share of the mortgage. I began running, which I had promised myself I would do for years and never had. My first attempt was humiliating. I made it 3/4 of a mile before stopping. The second attempt was less humiliating. By 6 months in, I was running 4 or 5 miles at a time, and I had stopped thinking of it as exercise and started thinking of it as the hour of the day that belonged entirely to me. 14 months after I handed Sarah that envelope, I ran a half marathon. My time was not impressive. I have never cared less about anything in my life. I crossed that finish line in the rain, and I stood there and I thought about the parking lot where I had sat in my car in the dark writing a list, and I thought about how much distance there was between that night and this morning, and I felt, for the first time in a very long time, completely okay. I also got a second dog. Her name is Penny. She is a small, chaotic terrier mix of unclear origin who has absolutely no respect for personal space, furniture, or the concept of boundaries. Chester was initially deeply offended by her existence. They are now completely inseparable and sleep pressed against each other every night. I watch them sometimes and feel a specific variety of contentment that is very hard to put into words. And then there was Diana. I met Diana 14 months after everything fell apart, at a trail run on a Saturday morning in April. She was volunteering at a water station at mile 8 of a 10-mile race. I was dying at mile 8 of a 10-mile race. She handed me a cup of water and looked at my face and said, completely deadpan, "You look like you're having a wonderful time." We talked for 2 hours after the race while sitting on a curb outside the finish area. She is a physical therapist. She is funny in the specific way that takes you by surprise, not loud, not performing, not trying to be funny, just genuinely, quietly, unexpectedly hilarious. She is patient in ways I was still learning to accept, because I came back into the world of trust carefully and slowly and sometimes not gracefully, and she never made me feel broken or difficult for it. We have been together for almost a year. I am not going to tell you it is a fairy tale. I am more careful now than I was before. I notice things I used to let slide. I ask questions I used to assume the answers to. I am different from the person I was before the Tuesday in February. I will probably always be somewhat different. But different is not worse. Different is simply the shape you become after something reshapes you. As for Sarah and Marcus, they are still together, as far as I know. I hear things occasionally through what remains of the mutual friend network. By all accounts, they argue frequently and intensely. I think there is a particular mathematics to relationships built on betrayal. The trust that was broken to build the thing together becomes the ghost that lives inside it permanently. The foundation was laid in deception and the foundation remembers. But honestly, and I mean this sincerely, not performatively, I do not think about them very much anymore. I think about Diana. I think about Chester and Penny. I think about the half marathon I want to run in the spring that I think I can finish in a better time than the last one. I think about work and about Linda's last text message and about what I want to plant in the backyard this summer. I think about my life. The one that exists now. The one I built from what was left after the other one fell apart. And that more than the settlement, more than the email to HR, more than Marcus deleting his Reddit account in a panic, that is the real victory. Not their loss. Not their consequences. My peace. The life I chose on purpose from the rubble of the one that was taken from me. That is what they could not take with them when they left. Before I let you go, I want to read you a few of the comments from the original Reddit post, because some of them genuinely stopped me in my tracks when I read them. The top comment, from a user called Strategic Not Scorned, said, "He heard what he heard and went downstairs and made himself a coffee. This man is built entirely differently from the rest of us, and I mean that as the highest possible compliment I am capable of giving another human being." A user called Document Everything always replied underneath it, "The iPad detail is extraordinary. He didn't install spyware. He didn't go through her phone. He used the shared family device that was already sitting on his own kitchen counter. Marcus synced the app himself. The trap existed because of Marcus's own carelessness. He walked into it entirely on his own." Someone called Family Law Follower wrote, "Speaking as someone adjacent to family law, the decision to call Patricia first, before doing anything else, is the single most important thing in this entire story. People blow up their financial futures in the first 48 hours after discovering infidelity because they act on emotion before talking to anyone. This man went to a lawyer first. That single decision probably saved him tens of thousands of dollars and months of additional pain." And my personal favorite from a user called Linda's Lunchpal, which said simply, "He kept the mom. He lost the wife and the best friend, and he kept the mom." This is the most impressive outcome in the entire story, and I don't think that's debatable. If you're sitting somewhere right now listening to this and you're going through something that feels like what I described, the betrayal, the disbelief, the particular suffocating feeling of realizing that the life you thought you had was not entirely real, I want to say something directly to you. The pain is real. Don't minimize it. Don't try to skip it or outthink it or project manage your way past it. The pain has to be felt. But the pain is not permanent. Document. Plan. Get professional advice before you do anything drastic. Protect yourself. And then when the time comes, let go. Not for them. Let go for you. Because the person who carries the weight of what happened to them indefinitely is not protecting themselves from more pain. They are delivering more pain to themselves on behalf of someone who isn't worth it. The best revenge was never making someone else's life worse. It was making yours better. Genuinely, durably, unignorably better. The kind of better that requires no audience and no acknowledgement from the people who wronged you. The kind of better that you feel on a Tuesday morning when you are drinking your coffee in your own house with your dogs at your feet and the person you love is in the next room and the people who betrayed you are not in your thoughts at all. That kind of better. If this story stayed with you, hit the like button. Share it with someone who might need to hear it today. Subscribe to Reddit Revenge Hub. Every single week we bring you stories like this one. Real people. Real betrayals. Real justice. Real rebuilding. Drop a comment below. Tell me, what would you have done differently? Would you have confronted them that Tuesday, or taken the long road? I read